The engineer's thumb. The exciting affair of Mr. Hatherley's thumb happened in the summer of 1889, not long after my marriage. I was in practice as a doctor, but I often visited my friend, Sherlock Holmes, at his Baker Street rooms, and I sometimes even managed to persuade him to come and visit my wife and me. My practice had steadily become more successful, and as I happened to live near Paddington Station, I got a few patients from among the railway workers there. One of these, a guard whom I had cured of a painful disease, was always praising my skill and trying to persuade new patients to come to me. One morning, a little before 7 o'clock, I was woken by our servant knocking at the bedroom door. She said that 2 men had come from Paddington Station and were waiting in my office. I dressed quickly and hurried downstairs. I knew from experience that railway cases were usually serious. Before I had reached the office, my old friend the guard came out and closed the door tightly behind him. "I've got him here," he whispered, pointing over his shoulder with his thumb, as if he had caught some strange wild animal for me. "It's a new patient. I thought I'd bring him here myself, so that he couldn't run away. I must go now, Doctor. I have my duties, just as you have." And he was out of the house before I could thank him. I entered my office and found a gentleman seated by the table. He was dressed in a country suit with a soft cloth cap, which he had put down on top of my books. There was a bloody cloth wrapped round one of his hands. He was young, not more than 25, I thought. He had a strong face, but he was extremely pale and seemed to be in a state of almost uncontrollable anxiety. "I'm sorry to get you out of bed so early, Doctor," he began, "but I had a very serious accident during the night. I came back to London by train this morning, and at Paddington I asked the railway people where I could find a doctor. One good man very kindly brought me here. I gave your servant a card, but I see that she has left it over there, on the side table." I picked it up and looked at it. "Mr. Victor Hatherley," I read. "Engineer, 3rd floor, 16A, Victoria Street." "I am sorry you have had to wait so long," I said, sitting down. "Your night journey must have been dull, too." "Oh, my experiences during the night could not be called dull," he said, and laughed. In fact, he shook with such unnatural laughter that he sounded a little crazy. "Stop it!" I cried. "Control yourself!" I poured out a glass of water for him. But it was useless. He went on laughing for some time. When at last he stopped, he was very tired and ashamed of himself. "It was stupid of me to laugh like that," he said in a weak voice. "Not at all." I poured some brandy into the water. "Drink this." Soon, the colour began to return to his pale face. "That's better," he said. "And now, Doctor, would you mind looking at my thumb? Or rather, at the place where my thumb used to be?" He took off the cloth and held out his hand. It was a terrible sight, and although I had been an army doctor, I could hardly bear to look at it. Instead of a thumb, there was only an uneven, swollen red surface. The thumb had been completely cut or torn off. "Good heavens!" I cried. "This is a terrible wound. It must have bled a great deal." "Yes, it did. I fainted when it happened, and I think I must have been unconscious for a long time. When I returned to consciousness, I found that it was still bleeding. So I tied one end of this cloth very tightly round my wrist and used a small piece of wood to make it even tighter. Excellent. You should have been a doctor. I'm an engineer, you see. The force of liquids is my subject. This has been done, I said, examining the wound, by a very sharp, heavy instrument. An axe, he said. It was an accident, I suppose. No. Was somebody trying to murder you then? Yes. How terrible. I cleaned the wound and bandaged it. He did not cry out as I worked on his hand, though he bit his lip from time to time. How are you feeling now? I asked when I had finished. I feel fine. Your brandy and your bandage have made me feel like a new man. I was very weak, but I have had some terrible experiences. Perhaps you had better not speak of the matter. It upsets you too much. Oh no, not now. I shall have to tell everything to the police. But really, if I did not have this wound, the police might not believe my statement. It is a very strange story, and I have not much proof of it. And I doubt whether justice will ever be done, because I can give the detectives so few clues. In that case, I said, I strongly advise you to see my friend, Sherlock Holmes, before you go to the police. Oh, I have heard of Mr. Holmes, said my visitor, and I should be very glad if he would look into the matter. Though, of course, I must inform the police as well. Would you write me a letter of introduction to him? I'll do better than that. I'll take you round to him myself. You're very kind. We'll call a carriage and go together. We shall arrive just in time to have breakfast with him. Do you feel strong enough to go out? Oh, yes. I shall not feel comfortable in my mind until I have told my story. Then my servant will call a carriage, and I shall be with you in a moment. I rushed upstairs and quickly explained everything to my wife. 5 minutes later, Mr. Hatherley and I were in a carriage on our